Hello. Well, it's day 5 in Arizona versus Lori Daybell, trial 2 for the conspiracy to commit murder against Brandon Bardot, the attempted murder of Brandon Bardot. So, well, we heard yesterday that Treena K has only one witness for today, and then the state will rest. We will see if Lori presents a defense. If not, they'll go to jury instructions, closing statements. That's what's on the agenda. We shall see. Lori has entered the courtroom. Also, of note, Lori has filed another complaint against Judge Beressky, trying to get him removed, saying she feels harassed and intimidated and feared from when she was removed from court by him the other day. Last-ditch effort to try to get everything tossed. She really spends a lot of time putting personal grievances in instead of getting on with her case. Absolutely no defense case presented. No, I don't think she's ready. She didn't submit anything over. If she does send anything, I don't know if it's going to even be allowed. We'll find out after the witness testifies. There will be no camera on the witness, but we'll hear his voice. Nick Ballance is an FBI agent. No photographs due to the nature of his work lately. There'll be no photographs allowed in anybody with cell phones or anything in the court, and there'll be no images on him. Okay, so it'll be started soon. I'm going to go try to find that filing so I can tell you more details about what Lori filed. Well, she definitely still having a go at Judge Beressky.
We're on the record, State of Arizona versus Daybell. The parties are present. The jury's not present. We're ready to bring in the jury.
Sure, Judge, just a couple things. One, the first witness is Special Agent Nicholas Ballance. We do have a prior ruling on that. I would like to request that the FTR be sealed and any video by the media have him blurred for the prior court order.
So it's order directing that this particular witness, in order to not compromise other investigations that he may be involved in, the media is precluded from showing his image. Whether they blur him or just focus on another area of the courtroom is up to them, but they're not to broadcast his face or what he looks like.
And so we would ask that FTR as well be sealed.
I'll order that his portion of the testimony be sealed on the FTR. Anything else?
Just one other thing, Your Honor, outside the presence of the jury. We previously yesterday admitted redacted affidavits. For appellate purposes, I'm just going to ask to admit Exhibit 161, 163, and 168, which are the full actual affidavits, unredacted, just for appellate purposes only.
Numbers again, 161 through 163.
Sorry, 161, 163, and 168.
All right, 161, 163, 168 are admitted for the record. They're not to go back to the jury.
Thank you.
Anything from the defense before we bring the jury in?
Yes, Your Honor. I would also like to include the letter from Tammy Lachik that she's unavailable to testify to be admitted for appellate purposes as well.
What, is it marked?
I thought I had a copy. I will get a copy to you guys.
All right, we can mark it, and once it's marked, we'll take that up.
Okay.
No, that's a different one. Okay, let's bring the jury in. You want to get your witness ready?
Do you have one in your file? I never saw it.
Jurors can be seated when they get to their chairs. All right, please be seated. The jury is present. The state can call its next witness.
They call Special Agent Nicholas Ballance.
Sir, you're going to come up right here in front of my clerk and she'll swear you in.
Hello. Can you please spell your first and last name? Right hand, please. You do solemnly swear that testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Up the ground, the court reporter, up the way.
Go ahead.
Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, my name is Nicholas Ballance. Last name is spelled Ballance, and I'm a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
How long have you worked with the Federal Bureau of Investigations?
Since June of 2016.
What are the different jobs you've held while working there?
So I've served as a special agent as well as a period of time as a supervisory special agent. And currently I'm assigned to the Salt Lake City Division and work out of Boise, Idaho.
Now, prior to becoming a special agent with the FBI, did you have other law enforcement experience?
I did. I served as a deputy U.S. Marshal for 9 years prior to working for the FBI.
Now, as an agent with the FBI, have you been serving as a cast field asset?
Yes. So I'm a member of what's called the Cellular Analysis Survey Team, or CAST for short. And it's a specialty that utilizes cellular records as a part of investigations, trying to determine where a phone was whenever that has any significance to a criminal investigation.
How long have you been doing that?
I've been certified since October of 2019.
When you were working for the U.S. Marshals, did you do any work with cellular phones there?
I did. I was assigned to locating fugitives for a significant period of time with my career with the Marshal Service. And so I was able to use cell phone records to aid in locating fugitives successfully on several hundred occasions.
Can you tell us the education or training that you have to become a cast member?
Yeah, so for the FBI with CAST, it starts with an application process where you would express interest in getting into the program. And then there's multiple trainings that you would go through before you're considered certified. It would start with our basic course, which is a 2-day course. During that course, you're looking at cellular theory and discussing the different cellular providers that, the major ones in the United States, and looking at records and putting those records onto a map. If you complete that successfully, you would go to our advanced course. In the advanced course, it's a little bit more in depth than basic, talking about some of the same topics, but you're also provided practical tests that you have to turn in, and then those tests are graded. At the conclusion of the advanced course, if you complete that successfully, you would go on to our what's called CIRA. It's a 3-day course, or was when I went through it, and it's our critical incident readiness exercise. So as a part of that training, there's no instruction. You're just presented with problems and practical scenarios that you would have to go through, map out records, and reach a conclusion. And it's supposed to simulate like a command post style environment where you're getting information rapidly as a part of the training in a short duration. If you complete that course, you would go to our 4-week certification, and that is extensive classroom lecture that includes radio frequency professors that are teaching about in the field of radio frequency. We also get instruction from the major providers in the United States for the cellular industry, to include their engineers as well as their subpoena compliance personnel. On top of that, we have a practical exercise that's assigned to us that we have to work from beginning to end, that culminates into testifying at the end and presenting a report and being challenged on that report, both by prosecution and defense that are simulated role players. At the conclusion of all of that, you would be considered certified as a member of CAST.
Do you have any annual recertification types of trainings to remain active as a CAST member?
Yes, so we have to complete a certain number of record analysis during that each year. And on top of that, we have a one-week certification conference that we attend each year that includes updates from the major providers in the cellular industry, as well as updates when it comes to the field of cellular technology from radio frequency engineers. And that's each year that you're in the program.
Have you previously testified as an expert in the area of cellular analysis
Yes, ma'am, I have.
and as a CAST member?
Yes.
In this case, were you asked by the Gilbert Police Department to analyze some cell phone records?
I was.
Were you provided with cell phone records for a Lori Vallow for a 480, 489, 4652?
Yes, ma'am, I was.
Were you provided with cell phone records for an Alexander Cox for the phone number 480-351-9120?
Yes, ma'am, I was.
And were you provided with track phone records for a cell phone purchased from a Walmart in Idaho Falls, Idaho, with a phone number of 304-960-5998?
For that one, I was from Track Phone as well as from Verizon.
Okay. Were you also asked to include or analyze some Google historical location data associated with a Google account, homerjmaximus@gmail.com?
Yes, ma'am, I was.
Can you tell us what is historical location data?
Yeah, so Google offers a range of services with their products, and one of those being location history. So if you were to opt into location history on your Google account, what that would do is it would Google would maintain different locations that the device that's reporting that location information where it was historically. So if the user has that active, it would depend on the specific phone that was relaying that information to Google. So as an example, if I have a Google account and I have 3 different phones, I could access that Google account from all 3 of those phones. But if only one of them I've opted into location services, then any of the location history that Google maintained would only be associated with that specific phone for the location of where that phone was.
But the data overall from Google, they might provide information from all the devices though, in terms of like searches that were done.
Correct. And again, it depends on how the user has their account set up with what information is going to be maintained by Google, specific to the many different products that Google has and offers to a user.
Okay. Were you asked to look at a specific time frame?
I was, specifically late September into early October in this case.
Did you create a report to help explain your process and explain the analysis of these cell phone records and these Google records?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And because it's on a thumb drive, I'm just gonna share the first page. And it's 189, if I can have my paralegal. Does that look like your report that you created in response to the request by Gilbert Police Department?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
State will move to admit Exhibit 189.
Any objection to 189? 189 submitted.
If I may publish. So starting on the first page of your report here, what did you include here for us to understand as part of your analysis and review of devices and phones?
So this is basically the cover sheet that I would put on all my reports, and it's showing the specific accounts that I did analysis for. So in this case, the 3 telephone numbers are listed at the top, one ending 4652, one ending 9120, and one ending 5998. Additionally, in this case, since I analyzed Google location history, the account that Google location history was associated with is listed. That's the homerjmaximus@gmail.com. The specific dates that I conducted analysis for, which in this case were September 25th, 2019 through October 3rd of 2019. The date that I completed my report, case number associated with the report with the FBI, and then my name.
Now, you were provided these records that from the Gilbert Police Department for these cell phone numbers. Did that include information like subscriber information?
It did, yes, ma'am.
So the 480, 489, 4652, when you reviewed those cell phone records from Verizon, did that show a subscriber of Lori Vallow?
So it did not. It was subscribed through TrackPhone. So the name was not Lori Vallow, but there was an email address on the subscriber sheet associated with her.
Okay. The 480, 351, 9120, was that as a Verizon record? Did you receive the Verizon or the TrackPhone records?
I did, and that was subscribed to Alex Cox.
Okay. And the 304, 960, 5998, was that Verizon or TrackPhone?
So it was subscribed through TrackPhone.
When we're talking about TrackPhone and Verizon, and you talked about sort of major companies, how do those all interrelate?
Yeah, so when you're looking at cellular providers, you have 2 different categories looking at kind of from a wide perspective. You have companies that have infrastructure, like cellular towers that they maintain throughout the region that they provide service to. So Verizon is one of those companies. They have cell phone towers throughout the United States. When you're talking about TrackPhone, they're a mobile virtual network operator, which is basically means that they don't have cell phone towers, so they have to lease space with another network in order to provide service to their customers. So TrackPhone, specifically in this instance, was utilizing Verizon for the number ending 5998 to provide service to that customer.
Okay. And the Google records that you were provided for the homerjmaximus@gmail.com, did that provide subscriber information?
It did, and that was associated with Alex Cox.
The second page of your report, what is this telling us about in terms of your analysis and explanation?
Yeah, this is basically just explaining the methodology of how I created this report and the process that goes into place in order to take records from a provider like Verizon and then put those records onto a map. Again, this is the methodology of how that would be done.
The third page here, one of the things that stood out was the time. We've heard about universal time. When you are looking at most or all of these cell phone records, were you provided the times in universal time, UTC time?
Yeah, so depending on the provider or the company that's providing records, kind of the biggest difference that you'll see in the different records types is a lot of them will provide records in different time formats. So specific to Google, they provide their records in what's called UTC time. And so that's just a time standard to where if you wanted to do the conversion and see what time that was in the area where you're at, you would have to do a conversion depending on what location you're in order to get it into the local time.
So when you were mapping these cell phone records and these Google location device records, were you converting them for the purpose of your report into the local time, either Arizona or Idaho?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
So while we're going through your report, all of those times will reflect either Idaho or Arizona, depending on where we're looking at.
Correct. And the report will reflect those times as well.
What do we see here and what is this explaining to us?
So just to talk briefly about how cell phones work and kind of how we're utilizing the methodology that I spoke of to map and estimate where a phone was historically. One of the things that we look at is how far a cell phone tower provides coverage to. That's usually one of the major questions. So typically a cell phone tower density map is going to look very similar to a population density map. So here we're looking at the city of Phoenix, and as you can see, there's a couple of towers in downtown Phoenix and in the urban areas of Phoenix. Those towers are going to provide coverage to a much smaller area due to the number of users that are needing to access a particular carrier. As you get more to the rural areas, you can see that those towers are more spread out, and towers in rural areas are going to have a larger coverage area just because there's not as many people in those locations.
And what is this page 5 reflecting?
This is just an example of what cell towers look like, not to insult anyone's intelligence, but if you look at the second tower from the left, traditionally back in the day, that's what we saw cell phone towers look like. Now there's more of a push to make them more aesthetically pleasing. So as you can see, like with the cactus, that's actually a cell phone tower, trying to disguise it so it's not looking like you have all this different metal around an area.
Page 6, what is this explanation for us in terms of what we've seen for your analysis?
Sure. So whenever I'm mapping a estimated location of where a phone was, I'm looking at a traditional tower has 3 sides. So if you look at the graphic on the left, you're looking at the tower itself, and then there's 3 sets of antenna facing 3 different directions on the tower. So if you look at the graphic on the right, that's looking from the top down. And so the cell tower is pushing out coverage kind of 360 degrees. But what providers do is they put different sets of antenna on that tower in order to optimize their network and divide that coverage up into different sectors. So whenever I'm looking at a call detail record and I'm seeing a particular call that might be of interest to an investigation, I would then look at the tower and sector that was used. So that way I can plot that tower onto a map and I can see what direction from the tower that specific sector is providing coverage to. So again, this is a traditional tower, but it's divided into 3 equal parts with sector 1, 2, and 3. And in my tower list, I'm able to see the tower that was used, and I'm able to see what's called an azimuth, which if you're not familiar with that, it's basically just showing me what the center line of a sector, what direction it is coming from the tower. So if you're looking at this particular graphic on the right, you can't see the 0, but it starts with 0 and goes all the way around to 360 degrees like a compass. So the center line of sector 1, that azimuth would be 0 degrees. Same thing with, if you look at sector 2, the azimuth on sector 2 would be 120 degrees. So that azimuth allows me to estimate the location of where a phone was in relation to where that tower is.
All right, so this information of the tower sectors and the azimuth, was that included with the cell phone records that were provided to you for those 3 phone numbers?
So it's included in a different file, but all of the different cellular providers that have towers throughout the United States, they have what's called a tower list that they update pretty regularly, at least every few months or quarterly. So in conjunction with the call detail records that show me who was called, at what date and time, what tower was used, I can marry that up with the tower list and then I can have an estimate of where that phone was whenever it had that specific interaction with the network.
So someone like Verizon will provide you with, for that specific phone number, calls made and what tower they're using, and then you're able to then get the location of that tower from Verizon to map it.
Correct. If you think about, and everybody can still do this online, but back in the day when you had your cell phone, each billing cycle, you would get that bill in the mail. And it would be fairly thick because it included all the different calls that were made on that account. And so the call detail records are very similar to that. We can see the date and time. We can see that it was a voice call. We can see the direction, if it's incoming or if it's outgoing. We can see the associated number. But what you don't see on that bill is the tower information. So the call detail records that we obtain as law enforcement, they include those columns, and those columns allow me to know at a specific date and time, this tower and sector was used, and then I can marry that up with the tower list and provide that estimated location of where a phone was.
So what do we see here on page 7? We have a legend for us.
Yeah, so this is depicting how I'm going to display different pieces of information on my report. So starting at the top, you're looking at Verizon towers are going to be represented with red dots. That's going to be important because when I talked about before, where you're looking at the density of Phoenix and towers are going to provide coverage to a smaller footprint in an urban area where there's towers close by, it's important to note where other towers are in relation to the one used. Because typically what we see is that a tower provides coverage to the next tower. So that's what allows me to estimate the coverage area of a tower and sector that was used for a particular interaction. Next, we see how we would represent the tower and sector. So the blue, black, and the red are going to be the 3 different phones in this case. So if you look at the blue, that's representative of a tower and then the direction from the tower that that sector is facing. So the blue graphics are going to represent the phone number ending 4652. Black will represent 9120. And red will be representing 5998. Additionally, you see to the right, the call information box. So whenever a phone has an interaction, you have that line in a call detail record, just like I talked about on the phone bill. I'm going to represent that particular call with the information that's provided from the carrier here. So you'll see the tower information at the top, the target number that is associated with, so what record that particular line came from, what account, the date and time, direction of the call, duration of the call, type of the transaction, the word I mentioned earlier, azimuth, which gives us the direction from the tower that that specific interaction took place, and then the associated number. And then additionally to the left, you'll see a call information box where there's data interactions between a phone and a network. There's less information there, but you'll at least see the date and time and the direction from the tower that that sector faces.
Okay. So these are things we will see in the mapping that you did for this case.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Oops, hold on. All right, page 8.
So I just spoke about how I would map cellular records. This is a legend to show how I would map Google location information. So I talked a little bit about Google derives their location information from different data sets. And so Google can estimate a location of a device by locating it via the GPS chip within the phone. It can do it via Wi-Fi as well as cellular. Specific to this case, we're only going to talk about locations that were derived via GPS and Wi-Fi. And so that's the icon that will be representative of that specific location line in the Google return. You also see a margin of error, which is showing Google in each specific line where they locate a device, they provide the estimated margin of error associated with that specific locate. So there will be a circle around the specific locate on the map. And then also, depending on if it's only a few locations, you'll see the information box with the specific date and time. If there are significant number of records on the same map, it would be very difficult to read to put every single information box associated with each line. So you'll see a summary box, which is going to include the number of records that are represented, as well as the margin of error associated with each record and where it was sourced from. I'll also point out here that I know I mentioned it before, but all of the Google location history in this case is going to be reported from the device ending 9120.
All right, so the 9120 number is the phone associated to Alex Cox, or
Yes.
subscribed to Alex Cox.
That's correct.
So whenever we see Wi-Fi or GPS, it's from Alex Cox's cell phone.
Correct.
Now, you talked about a margin of error, and we see on page 8 here the R14. Can you tell us what that means?
Yeah, so if I were to map a latitude and longitude that Google provided onto a map, they also provide the margin of error. So I would place that icon on the map, and then I would look at the margin of error column. So it's represented by R and then a number, and that 14 there, that means 14-meter radius from that mark on the map. The radius would be 14 meters, and then draw the circle around at that 14-meter radius. That's the margin of error that they're reporting.
So does that mean if you are told that the phone is at this GPS location, and there's a margin of error of 3 meters, that the phone could be anywhere within a 3-meter diameter of the spot?
Yes, and that's how Google's reporting it, so that's how we're mapping it.
Okay, and so when we see the circle that's shaded, is that your depiction of the margin of error that was provided by TracFone or by Verizon?
So that's the margin of error provided by Google.
Or Google, sorry. All right. And so again, we will see those icons and those circles for the margin of error for the Google records on your mapping.
Yes, that's correct.
What do we see here in this legend?
So these were addresses that the investigative team provided to me that were of significance to this investigation. And so it's got the address associated with each one, but when I represent them on the map, it's going to be utilizing the icons to the left.
So you had Brandon Boudreaux's address, 3875 East Phelps Street in Gilbert, Arizona, as one of the places for you to have a point of interest.
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
And then 2 different units at 565 Pioneer Road, apartment 175 and apartment 107.
Yes, ma'am. That's correct.
And then a self-storage plus on Airport Road in Rexburg, Idaho.
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
And then a Walmart at Idaho Falls, Idaho.
Yes, ma'am.
And then also a Melanie Boudreaux residence in Gilbert, Arizona.
Yes, ma'am.
So first map, can you tell us what we're seeing here and explain everything?
Yeah, so these maps are just laying out where the locations of interest were that was provided by the investigative team. And so whenever I have this is zoomed out a decent ways to incorporate both the address down in Idaho Falls and the addresses that are in Rexburg. And so there's a box to the side that's basically showing a zoomed in view of the apartment complex that includes the addresses for Alex Cox and Lori Vallow's apartments.
All right, so the Idaho Falls WM at the bottom is that Walmart, and then we can see the storage unit and then the zoomed out of the 2 apartments in Rexburg, Idaho.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Is this just a closer up single page of that?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
All right, what do we see here on page 12?
So the previous 2 pages were up in Idaho. This is down in the area of Gilbert, Arizona. So this includes 2 addresses, one for Brandon Boudreaux and one for Melanie Boudreaux.
Okay. And so we see that with the bluish purple and the pinky color.
Yes, and I didn't mention before, but you can see the red dots. Those are representative of Verizon towers that are in the area as well.
Okay. So when we get to page 13, you had told us that you were provided with the Homer J. Maximus at gmail.com records that were obtained by law enforcement. Did those Homer J. Maximus at gmail.com Google records show that the records were tied to an MEID number?
Yes, so that's a mobile equipment identifier. In the case of Google, this is very similar to what's called an IMEI, or International Mobile Equipment Identifier. The IMEI is the equivalent, kind of like a VIN on a phone. So it's associated with the hardware itself of the cell phone.
And so why is that important to see that the Google records for the Homer J. Maximus is tied to this MEID number?
So anytime, I think I mentioned it before, but anytime a phone accesses a Google account, Google keeps a record of that. And one of the things that they record is that MEID number, which, like I said, in this case is synonymous with the IMEI, or the hardware of a phone. So that identifies a device. So what I can do with that number is I can then take that to different cellular providers and determine whether that number has ever shown up on their network and whether they can associate that number to an actual telephone number.
And was that MEID number that we see here on page 13 that is associated with Alex Cox's Google records associated with that cell phone number 304-960-5998?
It was.
And did you determine, or were you able to review records to see when that association occurred?
Yeah, so if you go to the next page of the report, that's going to be a record that we received from Verizon. And it shows that again, IMEI is associated with the 304-960-5998. And they list an effective date of September 27th, 2019.
And just going back at the bottom of this information, we saw a registration time and a first data connection time. What is that?
So that's showing when that device accessed the Google account for the first time. And we see also the September 26th, 2019 at 7:58, which would be again in UTC time. So to get to either Idaho or Arizona, you would have to subtract 6 to 7 hours to get to the time of where that occurred.
So to be clear that we understand, what we're seeing now is that the Homer J. Maximus at gmail.com records from Google, the Wi-Fi and the GPS data are always going to reflect that 480-351 number, correct?
Yes, ma'am, correct.
But there is data in the Google records that now has been associated to that 304-960-5998.
Yes, and as I mentioned earlier, you can have multiple phones that access your Google account, but unless you have location history turned on every single one of those phones, Google is not going to record the location history associated with those phones. It's only going to record it on the device that you specifically turn that location history on.
So when we get to page 15 here, what are we seeing in these records?
So whenever you have a phone that is, like in this instance, purchased through TracFone, but utilizing the Verizon network, there's two different places that law enforcement has to go to get the complete set of records. So we would have to go to Verizon in order to see the call detail records and what towers are being utilized by that phone. But the point of purchase and subscriber information, we would need to go to TracFone. So specifically, this is the point of purchase information from TracFone associated with the number ending 5958.
So this tells us that this 5958 TracFone was purchased at a Walmart at Idaho Falls, Idaho.
Yes, correct.
And when does it show that being purchased?
So it shows it being purchased on September the 25th, 2019 at approximately 7:10 p.m.
Okay. And does it show a store number of 5494?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
So when we get to page 16, we start to see those icons for the Wi-Fi. So we're now talking about the 9120 number.
Yes, and so being this is the first map, I'll explain it a little bit more thoroughly than the others. But as you can see at the top, you're going to see what this record represents, Google location history associated with the Homer J. Maximus at gmail.com account. And then basically I'm putting the bookends of the times at the top. So These records are from September 25th, 2019, starting at 7:07 p.m. and continuing through 7:16 p.m. There's 6 of them. So you see a summary box. They're all sourced or derived from Wi-Fi. And of the 6, the margin of error is between 16 and 100 meters, which you can see with the black circles. Obviously, the smaller one there in the middle is closer to the 16 meters, whereas the larger ones are at 100 meters margin of error. And they are consistent with the device 9120 reporting its location to Google as being at the Walmart on Utah Avenue in Idaho Falls during that time period.
So basically, the 9120 cell phone is reading Wi-Fi signals around it and reporting that margin of error to Google.
Yes, and one thing I didn't explain earlier is that whenever a location is derived from Wi-Fi, it doesn't mean the device was connected to specific Wi-Fi points. It just needed to be in range of those Wi-Fi points and see it. So if you've ever experienced where you're going through the airport or you're looking at your location on Google Maps and it says turn on Wi-Fi to get a more accurate or precise location, it's because Google has a pretty vast database of knowing where Wi-Fi access points are throughout the United States. And so if I'm sitting here and I'm close to a McDonald's that has a Wi-Fi hotspot on it, and my phone sees that Wi-Fi hotspot, I don't need to connect to it for Google to know that that specific Wi-Fi hotspot is located at a specific address. And then Google can estimate my location based on my phone seeing those different Wi-Fi access points.
So in this case, we see the phone that's subscribed to Alex Cox, that's using his Google account, is at this Walmart in Idaho Falls between 7:07 p.m. and 7:16 p.m.
Correct. I would say it's consistent with being at that Walmart.
And so we had seen in the prior slide that the track phone, the 304-960-5958 number, was purchased around 7:10 p.m.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
So this phone associated to Alex Cox is utilizing or is reading the Wi-Fi around it and providing this data around the same time when that track phone, the 304 number, is being purchased at that Walmart.
Yes, ma'am, correct.
What does this next map show us, page 17?
So again, I'll speak a little bit more thoroughly on this one since it's the first time I'm showing a tower and sector being represented on my report. So again, at the top, you see the tower interactions, and the number associated with it is going to be the number ending 4652. The date, again, I'll usually book into this unless everything occurs within that same minute, but we're looking at September the 25th, 2019 at 7:08 p.m. And we see 2 incoming calls that occur, and 4652 is utilizing a tower and sector that is in close proximity to that same Walmart on Utah Avenue.
Now, when we are looking at this cell tower usage, do you know whether or not that phone has to be within that azimuth?
Sure. So whenever you're talking about radio frequency propagation and what the footprint of a tower's coverage area looks like, it's definitely not best represented by lines in the sand. It's more representative of like a cloud, to where if you look at the lights in this courtroom, you have the light that's shining up in the corner there, and you can see it pretty bright on the wall. But as you get farther down the wall, that light starts to dissipate and starts to get more and more dim. There's not just a line up there on the wall where the light ends. Radio frequency can be looked at the same way. So that signal is going to dissipate as it gets farther and farther away from the area where it's meant to provide coverage to. And so when you're looking at how I'm depicting this on a map, I'm showing the sector based on the azimuth and both sides of what the endpoints of that sector look like. But I would expect to see a phone that is in close proximity to that line potentially still be on a sector, even if it's not within that parameter. All that to say that when I look at this particular graphic, based on my training and experience, I would say that tower and sector is consistent with providing coverage to that Walmart due to the close proximity.
So what we can say is that the 4652 number associated to Lori Vallow is utilizing a tower in the area of the Walmart within a couple minutes of that track phone, the 304 number being purchased at that Walmart.
Correct, 2 minutes prior.
And in fact, is one of her phone calls last about 10 minutes?
Yes, ma'am, correct.
So through the time of that purchase even.
Yes, ma'am. I would just point out that whenever, if you go back, sorry, to that page, whenever I'm looking at a tower interaction, whenever that phone is interacting with the network, we're looking at whenever that phone initiates that specific interaction. And so during that 10 minutes of time, I can't tell you specific to Verizon where that phone was located. I can only tell you at 7:08 and 31 seconds, it was utilizing that tower and sector. But let's say, for instance, that phone were to move out of the area, that would not be able to be determined by the records that I have.
That phone number that is being called at that time as well, are you familiar with that phone number?
I am, yes, ma'am.
The 480-266-8587, whose phone number is that associated to?
I had that associated with Melanie Boudreau.
So at the time that Alex Cox's phone is in the Walmart, at the time that that track phone is being purchased, Lori Vallow is speaking with Melanie Boudreau using a cell tower in the area of that Walmart as well.
I wouldn't be able to say who was speaking with who. I could only say that the phone number 4652 received an incoming call from 8587 and then who those numbers are associated with.
So at the time that the phone associated to Lori Vallow is using a cell tower in the area of the Walmart, she is receiving a call from the phone associated to Melanie Boudreau.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's September 25th.
Yes, ma'am, correct.
What do we see then when we get to page 18 here?
This is looking at the first mappable record for the number ending 5998 on September the 26th at approximately 11:31 p.m., making an outbound call utilizing a tower and sector that provides coverage to both Lori and Alex's residences.
All right, so this is the phone that was purchased at the Walmart that we were just discussing in the prior maps.
Yes, ma'am, correct.
So on the 25th, that phone is purchased from the Walmart, where we see cell phones associated to Alex Cox and Lori Vallow being there or near there at the time of the purchase. And now we see the phone being activated.
So I wouldn't be able to say specific to whether that's the actual activation, but that is a call, I believe, to a number associated with either Verizon or track phone, but
We do know from the prior records that the phone was activated on the 26th, though.
correct. I know from records, and I don't know if it was one that we showed in here, but I know that it's first started being used on the 26th.
And I think if we were looking at page 13, we showed the first data connection time was September 26th at 7:58 p.m. UTC.
Correct. That was when it connected to Google, if I'm recalling correctly. And so the phone wouldn't necessarily have to have Verizon service to connect to Google. It could have done that via Wi-Fi or some other method to connect to Google the first time.
So what we're seeing here then is something potentially different, where we now know this phone, the 304, is actually using cell towers and able to now make outgoing calls.
Correct.
And it's using a tower that would be consistent with covering the apartments for Lori Vallow and Alex Cox.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, what do we see here? We're still on September 26th and
Yeah.
around the 2 minutes from the previous map.
Yeah, so this is just a record in close proximity in time, showing a Google location record where the number ending 9120 was reporting its location to Google as consistent with being at Alex Cox's apartment. That's on September the 26th, 2019 at 11:33 p.m.
So we see the track phone from Walmart using a cell tower at 11:31, and then we see Alex Cox's cell phone, I guess, reading Wi-Fi at 11:33.
It's reporting its location to Google at 11:33.
You've jumped ahead a couple days. So we had September 26th. Now we're looking at September 30th.
Yes, ma'am.
What are you depicting here, and what did you find from the records that you reviewed?
So this is showing on September the 30th, 2019, between 4:32 and 4:37 p.m. Starting at 4:32, the number ending 9120 is reporting its location to Google, consistent as being at Alex Cox's apartment. And then showing movement at 4:34, and by 4:36, the 9120 phone is reporting its location to Google, consistent with being at Lori Vallow's apartment.
And so that's where, when we're looking at that R15, that's the margin of error of 15 meters.
Yes, ma'am, correct.
So the phone is within 15 meters of being at Lori Vallow's.
That's what Google is reporting.
We're still at September 30th here.
Yes, ma'am. And so that's looking at the remainder of the day, going from September the 30th from 4:38 p.m. all the way to 11:59 p.m. Approximately 94 different records, all consistent with the number ending 9120 reporting its location to Google as being in the area of Lori Vallow's apartment.
And so here, because you had so many Wi-Fi readings that are reportings, you just put that there were 94, well, I guess 93 Wi-Fi and 1 GPS.
Yeah, and basically what I was trying to look at is whether there were any instances that indicated that that device went back to Alex Cox's apartment, and I was unable to find any.
So we're on page 22. What are we now seeing here?
So again, at the top, I'm basically bookending the dates and times. So we're looking at two different uses of the Verizon network by the number ending 5998. The first one is on September the 30th at approximately 12:34 p.m., utilizing a tower and sector that's up in Rexburg, Idaho. And then the next use that we see is October the 1st, 2019, the same phone number ending 5998, using a tower and sector consistent with being down in Arizona.
So the 12:34 p.m., that's Idaho time.
That's correct.
So when we looked at the movement, that would be before we saw the 9120 phone associated to Alex Cox moving from Alex Cox's apartment to Lori Vallow's?
Correct. And I would point out that this is not showing that at 12:34 that device began heading south towards Arizona. That's just the record that I had at 12:34. So there was no other use between those two time periods, so I'm not able to estimate where that phone was during that time period.
Okay. So we know at 12:34 p.m. on September 30th, that track phone, the 304 number, is still in Rexburg, Idaho, utilizing a receiving an incoming call at that time.
Yes, ma'am.
So let's talk about that call. Do you recognize that phone number, the 515-402-0143 number?
I do.
And that is a call being made to this Walmart track phone.
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
By whom?
So I have that number associated with Chad Daybell.
So Chad Daybell's phone is calling this Walmart track phone that just was activated a couple days earlier on September 30th at 12:34.
Yes, ma'am.
And then we don't see any call records for this track phone until October 1st, the next day.
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
We see on this map that you have 9:19 a.m. So this is Arizona time?
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
And so at this point at 9:19 a.m. on October 1st, that track phone from Walmart in Idaho Falls is now using a cell tower in Arizona.
Yes, ma'am.
And do we have it? We've seen the prior box that showed an incoming call. When we talk about outgoing, does that mean this track phone is making that phone call to someone?
It does.
And so who is this track phone calling at 9:19 a.m. on October 1st?
It's the same number from the previous Chad Daybell, the number ending 0143.
So map 23, what do we see here?
So since this is going back and forth between Arizona and Idaho, I tried to put the map of the specific state that it represents, just in case you're not familiar with a specific area. But this is showing on October the 1st, 2019, between 2:56 p.m. and 2:59 p.m., movement of the 9120 phone because it's reporting its location to Google as being 3 different locations along East Center Street in Rexburg, Idaho.
How is this? All right, so October 1st, 2:56 p.m. to 2:59 p.m. Idaho time, we see the 480-351 number associated to Alex Cox. His Google is reporting this location data.
Yes, ma'am.
Meanwhile, we see the track phone from the Walmart that also has been associated to the Homer J. Maximus Google account is in Arizona.
Correct.
What do we see in this next map?
So this is looking at October the 1st, 2019, from 3:10 p.m. to 3:36 p.m. The 9120 phone is reporting its location to Google, consistent with being in the area of the Self-Storage Plus in Rexburg, Idaho.
So did you ever view video from the self-storage unit from this time period of October 1st, 2nd, and 3rd?
I believe I did, but it's been some time since then.
You show some records there, so you were provided at least with information. Let me ask you this. Were you provided with information that Lori Vallow had rented a storage unit at this location at 433 Airport Road in Rexburg, Idaho?
I was, and one of those pieces of information was the receipt that you can see on the that page of the report.
And so when we're talking about the relevance of this, it was one of the locations in the original map that you were asked to look at during this time period?
Yes, ma'am, correct.
So to understand what we have going on October 1st, we have Lori Vallow renting a storage unit in Rexburg, Idaho at this time on October 1st.
That's based on the receipt that I was provided.
Okay.
That would be the
And
extent of my knowledge.
At the same time, you have the cell phone associated to Alex Cox reporting Wi-Fi and GPS location data to the Google at the same time that this is all, that Lori Vallow is renting this unit.
Yes, ma'am, correct.
What do we see then in map number 25?
So this is close to the same time period as the page before, October the 1st, 2019 at 3:24 p.m. And this is showing use of the 4652 phone for 2 incoming calls, utilizing a tower and sector in Rexburg, Idaho, that would provide coverage to the area of the Self-Storage Plus.
All right, so the previous map was about 310 to 336. So this is in that time period towards the end of it. The phone number we're talking about is the one that we've associated to Lori Vallow?
Yes, ma'am, correct.
And so when we see this cell tower use, is that a cell tower that would be consistent with providing coverage to the storage unit?
Yes, correct. And I say that because I'm familiar with the area and familiar with the terrain. And that's why I'm able to say that that tower and sector would provide coverage to that general area.
Okay. Now, when we're looking at this time, we see 3:24 p.m. Idaho time. What would that be Arizona time?
So Arizona is 1 hour behind, so that'd be about 2:24.
So at 2:24 Arizona time, this 480-266-8587 number is calling Lori Vallow's cell phone.
Correct.
And is that 480-266-8587 number the one you told us is associated to Melanie Boudreau?
Yes, ma'am.
And so all of this is going on while we also see Alex Cox's cell phone providing that GPS and Wi-Fi data for being in the area of that storage unit as well.
Yes, ma'am.
So we're continuing on October 1st in this, still in Idaho?
Yes, ma'am. This is October 1st at 5:17 p.m. Again, the 9120 phone is reporting its location to Google, consistent with being in the area of the Rexburg, Idaho temple.
So we've been talking about October 1st. When we get to page 27, are we now on October 2nd?
Yes, ma'am.
So we had some cell phone or one cell tower use by that Walmart track phone on October 1st. Are you now reflecting cell tower usage by that track phone on October 2nd?
Yes, ma'am. So this is showing records associated with the 5998 number between October 2nd, between 7:02 and 7:20. Starting over on the left side using a tower, two different sectors on a tower, 7:02 to 7:09 on the sector facing west. And then we see a shift at about 7:17 to utilization of the tower facing north-northeast, sector facing north-northeast, excuse me. Then by 7:19, we start to see use of a tower and sector that's just east of that location. My examination of these records, I would say it's consistent with that device likely moving eastbound.
Okay. So from 7:02 to about 7:18, the Walmart track phone from Idaho Falls, Idaho, is using cell towers in the area of Melanie Boudreau's residence.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
And then after 7:18, that cell phone, track phone from Walmart in Idaho Falls, Idaho, is now utilizing a cell tower closer to Brandon Boudreau's residence.
Yes, ma'am.
Is this a continuation of that morning reflecting that Walmart track phone?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Can you tell us what this map is showing us?
So this is showing the same thing, the 5998 phone on October 2nd between 7:22 and 7:24, utilizing two different towers, and specifically the tower more in the middle of the page, two different sectors on that tower, consistent with being in the area of Brandon Boudreau's residence.
So from 7:22 to 7:24, we're seeing cell tower use from that Walmart track phone, consistent with it being in the area of Brandon Boudreau's residence.
Yes, ma'am.
And this is the same cell phone we're talking about that has been associated to Alexander Cox's homerjmaximus@gmail.com Google account.
Yes, ma'am.
So we went back to Idaho in this photo.
Yes, ma'am. So this is back in Idaho in Rexburg, and this is showing on October the 2nd, 2019 at 8:02 in the morning, Arizona time, which would have been 9:02 up in Idaho. But there is an outbound call made from the number ending 9120 to the number ending 4652. This call is a little bit over 23 minutes. And during the call, both phones are using the same tower and sector, both of which provide coverage to the apartment complex that had Lori Vallow and Alex Cox's units in it.
So basically, we have the cell phone associated to Alex Cox, the 480-351-9120, calling the cell phone associated to Lori Vallow, 480-489-4652 at 9:02 Idaho time,
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
8:02 Arizona time.
Yes, ma'am.
And that call you said was not quite 24 minutes.
Approximately 23 minutes and 34 seconds.
While that is going on at 8:02 a.m., we've seen just a little earlier that the Walmart track phone from Idaho Falls is now utilizing cell towers in Gilbert, Arizona.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, during this call, did you have any Wi-Fi or GPS location data for that Homer J. Maximus Google account associated to that 351 number?
Yes, ma'am. There was one at 9 o'clock and 9:10, both consistent with the 9120 phone being in the area of Lori Vallow's apartment. But I'll also add to that, that entire day, that phone only reported being in the area of Lori Vallow's apartment, not Alex Cox's.
So basically, we continued what we saw from the day before, other than we saw, well, let me say this. So we saw the phone going over to the phone being the phone number associated to Alex Cox, the 9120 on the 30th, move over to Lori Vallow's apartment.
Consistent with that, yes, ma'am.
And then we saw location data provided to Google for that same phone, the 9120, moving at some point away from Lori Vallow's residence, going to, for instance, on the first, an area near the self-storage unit,
Yes, ma'am.
going to the temple,
Yes, ma'am.
and then returning back to Lori Vallow's apartment.
Yes, ma'am.
And then we have on the 2nd in the morning, this phone call between Lori Vallow's cell phone, the one associated with her, and Alex Cox's cell phone, or the one associated with them.
Yes, ma'am.
So as we get to slide 30, what are we reviewing here now? Where are we at?
So we're back in Arizona looking at records for 5998. Here we're looking at October 2nd between 8:39 and 9:16 a.m. And the 5998 phone is utilizing a tower and sector in the general area of Brandon Boudreau's residence. And there's 3 outgoing calls, 2 incoming calls, all from the number ending 0143.
Is that the phone that has been associated, that you are aware of, associated to Chad Daybell?
Yes, ma'am.
And Chad Daybell is Lori Vallow's husband?
I'm not sure if she was at the time, but
Correct.
that's my understanding now.
So when we look at this phone, were you aware that the shooting of Brandon Boudreau at 3875 East Phelps Street occurred around 9:13 or so in the morning?
It's been a period of time. I know it was sometime around then, but I wasn't sure the exact time.
So in the time period leading up to right around that 9:13 time, that's track phone from Idaho Falls Walmart is utilizing cell towers in Gilbert, Arizona that would cover the area of Brandon Boudreau's home at 3875 East Phelps Street.
Yes, ma'am.
What do we see here on map 31?
So here we see starting on October the 2nd at 9:17 in the morning, use of a tower and sector facing north on that tower, showing use of the 5998 phone, and that tower and sector would provide coverage to the area of Brandon Boudreau's residence. Then we see a shift starting at 9:19 to a sector that's facing more southeast, and continuing through 9:22, we see use of a different tower southeast of that location, consistent with that device moving southeast out of the area.
So if we had received information that the shooter in this case moved south to Pecos Road that we see here in the map, and then headed away, is that sort of the same direction that we're talking about? The cell phone is using towers in that same direction.
I would say it's consistent with that movement.
And then we see the cell tower as the morning moves on, going further south and east.
Yes, ma'am. I would just say southeast, based on the tower locations that I was looking at in the records.
And obviously, you're not able to tell us exactly where this cell phone is because it doesn't have the Wi-Fi or GPS location data being reported.
Correct. I'm only estimating locations based on the records that I have, and the records that I have are going to dictate how precise I can be with those estimated locations.
So here we know the cell towers that are being utilized by this phone during the morning there.
Yes, ma'am.
And again, when we look at these phone calls, incoming and outgoing, were all of them being made or received by that same phone number associated to Chad Daybell?
So here we're only looking at one call, but yes, that call is to the 0143 and it's an outgoing call to that number.
So we have cell towers that are reporting the phone, and then we also have phone calls starting to be made.
Correct.
Okay. So the first call we see after the 9:15 one from the prior page is at 9:22, which is an outgoing call to Chad Daybell's cell phone.
Yes, ma'am.
What do we see now here on page 32?
So this is looking at Google location information on October the 2nd, 2019, between 9:02 and 9:34. The 9120 phone is reporting its location to Google, consistent with being at Lori Vallow's apartment.
Okay. And you've told us that sort of this has been at any time from the 30th when you documented that cell phone associated to Alex Cox, the 9120, moving from Alex Cox's apartment over to Lori Vallow's. From September 30th through this time at 9:34 a.m. on October 2nd, did you ever see the phone move back to Alex Cox's apartment?
No, ma'am, I did not.
Slide 33.
So this is back in Idaho, showing the usage of the number ending 4652 on October the 2nd from 8:50 in the morning to 9:46 in the morning, sticking with Arizona time based on the fact that there was an incident that occurred in Arizona. So between 8:50 and 9:45, there's 5 instances where that phone is on the network and utilizing a tower and sector consistent with providing coverage to Lori Vallow's apartment. And there's 2 outgoing calls, 3 incoming calls. There's 1 outgoing call to the number ending 8587, which was associated with Melanie Boudreau. That call's a 35-minute call. And then there's 1 outgoing and 3 incomings with 0143. That number I had associated with Chad Daybell.
So since this is Arizona time, at 8:53, this would be before the shooting occurred in Arizona, if that occurred at 9:13.
Yes, ma'am, correct.
Okay. So prior to the shooting in Arizona, we have an outgoing call to the number associated to Chad Daybell,
Yes, ma'am, at 8:50.
and then an outgoing call associated to a phone for Melanie Boudreau, and then an incoming call associated to the number for Chad Daybell at 9:01.
Yes, ma'am.
And then there is a break in time before there is an additional incoming call at 9:44 and 9:45, both of those from the phone associated to Chad Daybell.
Correct. And I would just point out that that 1 call at 8:53, that's an outbound call to the number associated with Melanie Boudreau, is a 35-minute call. So it could have spanned a large portion of that time window.
So when we see the incoming call at 9:01, how does that work if she's on the phone outgoing?
I need to look at the specific call detail record, but that very well could just be call waiting, to where both calls occurred during that same time window, but I wouldn't be able to answer that question with the records I have in front of me.
That call's just 2 minutes, 2:09.
Yes, ma'am.
And then when we see the 9:44, we see that's just a 3-second initial call. And then at 9:45, a 7.5-minute call.
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
Slide 34. What are we seeing here?
So now we're zoomed out again because we're showing two vastly different locations of where towers that were utilized by the 5998 phone were. So we're looking at October 2nd between 1:22 p.m. and 8:13 p.m. Starting at 1:22, the 5998 phone is utilizing a tower and sector in Arizona, kind of northeast of Phoenix. And then by 7:53, the phone is utilizing a tower and sector in Utah.
When you're looking at this and you reviewed the records, the call that we see at 8:12 p.m. incoming from the phone associated to Chad Daybell, that's a 29, almost 30-minute call.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that the last call that is documented for this Walmart track phone from Idaho Falls?
There are additional calls, but I'll explain it like this. So whenever you're looking at a call detail record, if there's an incoming call and then there's duration and there's a tower and sector identified, that shows that that phone was on the network and we can show that that call connected. There's additional calls after that that don't populate those columns that would be associated with the tower. And so because of that, you could have incoming calls that would just basically go straight to voicemail because that phone is no longer on the network. So the 8:12 p.m. was the last record I saw in the call detail record where the phone was on the network to receive a call.
So slide 35, what state are we in? What are we seeing here?
So we're back in Rexburg, Idaho, and we're looking at October 3rd, 2019 at approximately 2:15 p.m. The 9120 phone is reporting its location to Google, consistent with being in the area of the self-storage plus.
And so we see 2:15 p.m. Wi-Fi data of that a phone associated to Alex Cox at the self-storage unit.
Yes, ma'am, correct.
And then were you also provided with video to show that at 2:13 p.m. There are two individuals removing a tire and another item, a bench seat from the storage unit that was rented by Lori Vallow?
Yes, ma'am.
Slide 36, what does this show us?
So this is showing use of the 4652 phone, October the 3rd, 2019, between 2:20 and 2:22. And the phone is using a tower and sector that would provide coverage to the apartment complex for both Lori and Alex.
So on October 3rd, we now have the phone associated to Lori Vallow, receiving calls from the phone that has been associated to Chad Daybell.
Yes, ma'am.
And that phone is using a tower consistent with them being in Rexburg, Idaho.
Yes, ma'am.
Were there any other network calls that you saw for that phone from the Walmart Idaho Falls track phone?
No, not after the call that was made in Utah.
And did that end your mapping of the data provided to you by the Gilbert Police Department in relation to this case?
Yes, ma'am, it did.
State has no other questions for this witness.
All right, Cross.
Do you want me to call you Special Agent or Mr. Ballance or?
Special agent is fine.
Okay. Special Agent Ballance, I just have a couple questions. You had mentioned that if all of you, okay, so you had mentioned if all of your locations are on, which one would it track? So say you have 3 phones associated to your Gmail account and all the locations are on, what would it be tracking?
Yeah, so if you were to look at the location history where you had 3 different devices that were reporting that location, whenever you look at the record, they have a column called device tag.
Okay.
So they would differentiate that device tag. That's a number Google provides, but that device tag would be associated with each individual device. So as an example, if you were looking at, you only wanted to see the Google location for phone 1, you would need to know the device tag associated with phone 1, and you could filter out and see just where that device was. Same thing with phone 2 or phone 3, depending on how many devices are reporting location information.
So if all 3 had their location on, then all 3 would be reported, even if they were in different locations?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay. And then what about if you have, so you're talking about a track phone being connected to a Gmail account, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And then what if you have an iPad, a laptop, and a phone all connected to the same Gmail account?
So it would depend on, again, that device tag column and the device itself. So the device would need to be able to report location information. Google would need to be able to derive that location information by some method. So if you had location information turned on all those different devices, it would really just depend on the device, how it reports it, but it would show up in that same location history record.
So if you're tracking something and you say phone 1, you don't want the iPad, you don't want the laptop, you're tracking phone 1, you would be able to distinguish that out by that number of phone 1?
So I would look in the Google record, the entirety of the record, it would tell you which device tag is associated with which device. And so then I could differentiate which device was being reported and which ones weren't.
Now, where did you get your, who sent you the information from Google? Did you get that directly from Google? I had missed that.
No, so those records were obtained via search warrant. I believe it was somebody from the investigative team in Rexburg,
Okay.
but I wouldn't be able to provide you a name of who sent those records down.
And how did those records come to you? Like an email or something? Or how?
Yes,
did you-
ma'am. They would usually be sent via email.
So is that like, it's a lot of data, right? So is it one giant email or several emails? How does that work?
It depends. Specific to this case, I can't remember whether it was sent via email, but we do have options to send larger files. And so if it's a Google record that has location history, has a bunch of different services that are being utilized by that user, it could be a very large file, and then it would be sent electronically to me.
Through like a hard drive or a flash drive, something to that effect?
We have some ways that we can send it electronically that they're capable of transferring larger files, per se.
And so the data that you received from this email or from a larger, did you receive it from an email? You don't remember if you received it from an email, is that correct?
I don't recall. I would say that given this particular file, I know it was larger, so I would guess that it probably came via some type of transferring platform versus email.
Okay. And then if you don't know who you got it from, how do you know if that information is accurate?
So I'm basically mapping out records as I receive them. So I would look at the certificate of authenticity. I would ensure that it's a record that came from Google. But aside from that, I'm mapping records as I receive them.
So you don't have any way to know if it was altered before it got to you, basically?
Correct.
Okay. And you're saying that you're getting all of your information directly from Google. So would it be different information if you had the phone itself? Or are you getting all the information from Google that you would have with this phone?
So with CAST and the specific unit that I'm assigned to, we're not looking at information that comes out of the device. We're looking at the records that were generated with particular providers. So although we could get information additionally from the forensic download of a phone, what we're looking at is those records from the providers that are maintained separate from the phone, if that answers your question.
So my question is, would you have more information if you had the phone?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so you could track it better per se.
I wouldn't say better. I would just say that you could potentially have more information that would help determine whether the records are consistent with the overall picture of what both the carrier records are showing and what the phone records are showing. So as an example, my phone right now, if I'm sending text messages back and forth, those messages have content, they have context of, if I say I'm on the way to the airport or I'm going to leave here in 10 minutes. Separate from that, you have the records from Verizon that would show feasibly where my phone was. Now, if you marry those records up, you definitely have more information and you could tell the story better, but one's not necessarily better. It just depends on the circumstance.
So one doesn't negate the other, it just confirms it.
Sure.
Okay. So is it typical, would you say, for people to have more than one device associated to their email?
Yeah, this day and age, I would say so, just because a lot of people have more than one phone.
And you could have multiple devices, like 5 iPads and 5 phones and a couple computers, all generated and giving Google information from the same Google email?
Sure. It depends on what your, it's going to be dependent on every single individual. But yeah, if you have an iPad, a laptop, a phone, and you connect all those to your Google account, it's not unreasonable for me to see records associated with multiple devices that have access to Google account.
Okay. And you can't put a person anywhere, right?
So anytime I'm estimating a location of a device, it's not an estimated location of a person, it's an estimated location of a device. And it really depends on the records that I obtain. So while I've been very successful in determining a location of an individual based on their device, it depends on the records of whether that search area is smaller or larger.
Okay. So if you were to give a teenager a phone associated to your email account, and they're at an amusement park going on a bunch of rides, and then you're doing a download, it could look like you were in all these places, but you were really not. Is that true?
Can you rephrase that question a little bit?
So if you just had a track phone that was associated to your Gmail account and anyone else had it, it would look like you were in that place.
So the device, if the device is reporting to Google its location information, then I would look at those locations that it's reported as the areas where that phone was at a particular date and time.
Right. So you can't put a person anywhere, but you are locating the device. Is that correct?
Correct. I'm locating a device.
Okay. Do you remember about what you had said that on October 3rd at 2:15, the device was at the self-storage plus. Was that the track phone?
No, that was the number ending 9120. So that was reporting its location to Google as being consistent with being at the self-storage plus.
And did the track phone ever, I want to say ping, but give a location in Rexburg after October 3rd?
Not after October 3rd, no ma'am.
Do you remember the last time when it did?
I know the last time in the call detail record was that page where it showed the phone being used in Utah, and I believe that was October the 2nd, towards the evening hours.
Do you know where in Utah that last location was?
If you were to pull up that page on the report, I could give you the area, but I know it was southeast of Salt Lake City.
Okay. There was something about the meters. So when you were talking about on page 6, you show the 3 slides with the sectors.
Okay, are you able to pull up page 6?
Oh, I'm sorry. Sure.
No, you're fine.
It's okay, but just hand it to him. Or do you want it? You can put it on. You want it on here?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how to work it now.
It's okay.
You got
Oh,
Zoom.
technical.
And roll the top button. Roll. Oh, there we go.
Oh.
Roll it. The other way.
There we go.
Roll.
Sorry. I just wanted to ask a question about the meters.
Sure.
So you had said something about, is it 150 meters in each of those sectors? Was that what I heard?
So it's degrees instead of meters. So basically what you're looking at is how a sector is divided up of a tower. And so specific to this one, I think I was mentioning sector 1. And when you talk about the azimuth or direction from the tower that that particular sector is facing, you would use that azimuth in degrees to give you that direction.
So with the 2 apartments being so close in proximity, and you were talking about that it's pinging on a cell tower that shows both. So I'll show you this one. I think it's this one. 18. So this circle right here that's both apartments are within that same, is that cell phone coverage?
So that specific graphic there, when you're looking at that circle, all that circle is doing is showing the direction from the tower of where that specific sector is providing coverage to. So in this instance, that tower, that sector is facing northwest, and that particular tower and sector is providing coverage to a great deal of Rexburg. But included in that coverage would be the apartment complex for both Alex and yourself.
And so do you know how far apart those apartments actually are?
I know they're fairly
Meters?
close. It's been a while
Oh, in
since
meters, but
I've been out there. It's been a while, but I know there was maybe 1 to 2 buildings between, but they were relatively close.
so are you able to tell from location-wise, are you able to tell the difference with a cell phone tower, or is it some other way that do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
Okay.
So with this particular tower and sector, that usage at 1131, there's no way you could say definitively that that phone was at Alex's apartment, was at your apartment. You're just basically saying that's utilizing a tower and sector that provides coverage to that area. So the phone could be anywhere within that coverage area whenever that particular call was made.
Okay. But there is a way to distinguish if it was at either one, but it's not that cell phone tower.
Not via the call detail records from Verizon. You would need the Google location history, which is giving a much tighter margin of error associated with that device.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. So when you had spoke about the Walmart, I don't know what page that is, but you were showing that according to Google, is that correct? That a phone associated with me and a phone associated with Alex were in that Walmart shopping center? Is that
So I
correct?
think you're talking about page 16. So there's two different pages associated with that statement. The first one is the 9120 phone reporting its location to Google, and that's where you can see multiple locations consistent with being at that Walmart in Idaho Falls. The page following that is looking at the phone associated with you that was utilizing a tower and sector that would provide coverage to the general area of that Walmart. So it's two different, basically, versions of records that are providing two different estimates as to where those two phones were.
Because one is a phone call, so it has an outgoing tower. Is that correct?
So one is looking at the Verizon network, and so it's utilizing that specific tower and sector for that. I can't remember whether it was an incoming or an outgoing call. Whereas the Google location, that's information that that phone is reporting from either GPS or Wi-Fi to Google as where it's located during that same time period.
So could it connect to Walmart Wi-Fi? Does Walmart have a Wi-Fi? I don't know.
So it wouldn't need to. If Walmart had a Wi-Fi, it doesn't necessarily need to connect to it. It just needs to see it, because when the phone takes a measurement and sees that it's has a certain signal strength from that Walmart Wi-Fi, then it is able to estimate where that phone is, because Google knows where that particular Wi-Fi hotspot is located.
Do you have the ability to track someone walking around in a Walmart?
I mean, if you looked at the Google, if you're looking historically and you wanted to see, like, did an individual go to a particular aisle in Walmart, I think that would be a stretch, unless it's a very big Walmart and you're just trying to see whether they were in landscaping or over on the grocery side. It all depends on the information that you have in that record from Google. So if those margins of error are super small, you could potentially estimate that. But it really would just depend on the record that you have specific to the device that you're trying to locate.
And if you had the actual device, could you pinpoint that more accurately?
Again, it would depend on the device and what apps you're running on the device and what all is being potentially stored. So different phones have different ways that they store information. They have different GPS chips inside of them. Apps have different ways that they store information. And so it would really just depend on getting that phone, doing a forensic download of that phone, and seeing what you have.
And then could you compare that to the Google information that you got and have a much more accurate picture?
I wouldn't say you would always have a more accurate picture, because you might not have any records that you might do a forensic download and you're not able to pull out any location information. I would say that it's always better to have more information to do that comparison, but it's not a guarantee that it's going to make it better by having the forensic download of the phone.
So it would be more accurate as far as locations from Google?
I wouldn't say it'd be more accurate. It's just, it's a different record, you know? So if you have a Google location record that has a significant number of locations, they're all 2-3 meter hits because you were potentially standing outside, that's going to be pretty precise. But it's kind of speaking in, it really just depends, because you don't know what that record's going to look like until you get it and you review it.
So if you don't have your location on, are you able to track where things are, or only if it connects to a Wi-Fi?
So again, it's going to depend on the specific app that you're speaking about. So like if you go into your phone, you can turn location services on or off for a lot of different apps. And so whenever I'm evaluating records from places like Google or different applications that have stored that location data. So it really just depends on how you have your specific phone set up and what you've opted into or out of as far as location sharing.
Okay. So basically, your report is indicative of phones associated to certain emails in certain locations at certain times.
So the one phone is associated with the Gmail account. That's the 9120.
Okay.
The other two phones are, I'm looking at Verizon records. So it's
Okay.
basically what Verizon maintained for those specific numbers.
And is one more specific than the other, the one with Gmail or the two with Verizon?
I would say that the locations being reported to Google had smaller areas to estimate where the device was. When you're talking about the Verizon records, the records that I had, I'm only able to estimate a general area based on what the coverage of a particular tower and sector provides coverage to.
Okay. And what is the radius of that, the tower coverage of Verizon?
So if you go back to some of my earlier statements, it's going to depend on where you're located. So downtown Phoenix, tower density follows population density. So the coverage areas in downtown Phoenix are going to be a lot smaller than if you get out into rural areas where there's just not as many users.
Mhm.
And so because of that, that coverage area is going to be large. Typically, I estimate that the coverage area of a tower is going to be the area between that tower and the next tower closest to it.
So with the Verizon records, that was the one that would say 16 meters or 15 meters. Was that with the Verizon records?
No, that would have been the Google location if it's what I think you're referring to, where there's a margin of error with a circle around it. That's
Mhm.
solely from Google. That would not be from Verizon.
Okay, so with Verizon, it's more accurate, and with Google, it's with the meters, within a certain amount of meters?
It's the way that they're measuring. Google's providing their margin of error. Verizon is not. For Verizon, when we're estimating a coverage area, I'm using my training and experience of locating phones historically and estimating that phone, what the coverage area is going to be for the tower and sector that phone used.
So is it which one, the Gmail or the Verizon that is giving you the information that there was no moving of the phone from one apartment to the other?
So whenever I made that statement, it's based off the Google location history. And so what I'm looking at is for a period of time, every Google location, every line in that Google location history record. So whenever I'm looking at those and I don't see that device has either moved or gone to Alex Cox's apartment, that's all from the Google location record.
Right, so if a phone was just in a car driving around, right, then it would show it in movement everywhere that car went?
It would depend on if it's reporting its location during that movement. So let's say, for instance, that car left a parking lot of that apartment complex and drove 15 minutes north and then 15 minutes back. As long as there's a Google location record during that 30-minute window, that's where I would be able to say that there was movement. But if there's a record at 9 o'clock in the morning and then there's not another record until 9:30, I can't say definitively that phone didn't move during that 30-minute window. All I can say is this is where it was at 9 o'clock and this is where it was at 9:30.
Because it's not reporting.
Correct. Every estimate that I make is based on there has to be a record in a line of a record for me to determine a potential location.
So can you explain that to me, what it's reporting? So if a phone is off, it's not going to be reporting anything. But if it's just sitting there stagnant, it's not going to be reporting anything? Can you
It
explain that?
depends. Typically, I've seen in records that I've reviewed on a regular basis, if a phone is stationary, it's not going to report as much. And if it's moving, it potentially would report more. But again, the phone has to be on and the phone has to be opted into location history. And that's what's going to generate that record that's maintained by Google that I can then evaluate and see potentially where a phone was in the past.
Okay, so you have access to what is being reported,
So I would have access to the Google location record.
right? Only what the phone is reporting or what the device is reporting.
To Google, yes.
Okay. And you made your report off of what was reported, and it's not, I'm just trying to get to, it's not constant. You're not getting a phone record from, like, say, September all the way through October, and you know everything of where that went. Because it wouldn't be reporting all that time. Is that accurate?
So I'll give you an analogy. Maybe this will potentially help. But if you think about, you live next door to your neighbor and your neighbor's car is in the driveway. They've got a red car in the driveway. And so at 9:02 in the morning, you go and look, the neighbor's car is in the driveway. 9:45, you go and look and the neighbor's car is in the driveway. And then one more time at say 11 o'clock, you look and the neighbor's car is in the driveway. You can only say that the neighbor's car was in the driveway at those specific instances because that's when you looked out the window. You could reason that maybe that car was there the entire time, but you can only definitively say where that car was when you have an instance that you looked out the window. So it's the same thing with the Google location record. So I can estimate where a device was as long as there's a date and time, a latitude and longitude, and a margin of error. If that's not present, then I'm not able to estimate during the window of inactivity where that device is.
So in your timeline, there could be blind spots where you don't know where the phone was or the device was or what it was doing.
If there's not a location record, I can't map it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Redirect.
So Detective, in your years working as a CAST agent, have you reviewed multiple Google records,
Yes, ma'am.
Verizon records,
Yes, ma'am.
track phone records?
Yes, ma'am.
And you told us that part of your process is to always look at the certificate of authenticity.
Yes, ma'am.
Was that done here?
Yes, ma'am.
Did anything about these records appear to be unauthentic or modified?
No, ma'am.
When you are mapping and creating these maps for us, are you just using the data and just showing us what it says?
Yes, ma'am.
In this case, you were given Alex Cox's Google or Gmail record for the homerjmaximus.com, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And that included location data.
Yes, ma'am.
And you were provided with records showing that that Gmail account was associated to the 9120 number.
Yes, ma'am. And
you were also provided, and those Google records is what gave us the GPS and the Wi-Fi location data for that cell phone 480-351-9120.
Yes, ma'am.
Then you also had the Walmart track phone, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
That phone was not reporting Wi-Fi or GPS data. You did not have any for that phone.
No, that phone was not reporting any location information to Google.
But based upon the Google records you had for the homerjmaximus@gmail.com, you were able to determine that Walmart track phone had accessed and associated with that homerjmaximus@gmail.com address.
Yes, ma'am. That phone accessed that Gmail account.
Okay. So when you're talking about the Walmart track phone, all you were able to map on that was cell tower use.
Yes, records from Verizon.
When we talk about the Walmart on September 25th of 2019, we have both the phone associated with Alex Cox, the 9120 phone that you mapped there, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And that mapping was again using the GPS and Wi-Fi.
Yes, ma'am. As reported to Google.
And that was, you were able to map that within as small as 16-meter radius.
I believe that's correct, but I'd have to look at the page to ensure the
Okay.
margin of error.
Just gonna throw this one up to make it faster.
Yeah, so the most precise was the 16 meters.
So it's in the Walmart.
It's consistent with being in the Walmart.
So unless the Walmart's smaller than 16 meters, pretty likely it's there, especially given the number of hits that you had in that location.
I'll say that if I were looking for that device and it was, 7:15 right now, and that's the records that I was seeing, I would go inside the Walmart to look for that phone.
Now, on the other hand, you also had cell tower usage for the phone number for the phone associated to Lori Vallow, the 4652 number, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
You did not have GPS or Wi-Fi for that.
Correct. That phone was never reporting location information to Google that I had.
So for that case, you were using cell tower data,
Yes, ma'am.
and you were able to determine that that phone was using a cell tower in the area of the Walmart at the same time as this phone is showing Wi-Fi location data at the Walmart.
Yeah, I think that was at 7:08 p.m. if I remember right.
So it would be in this time frame of 7:07 to 7:16,
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
and we see over there 7:08. So basically, both of those two phones, the phone associated to Alex Cox and the phone associated to Lori Vallow, are either showing specifically Wi-Fi location data in the area of the Walmart or using a cell tower in the area of the Walmart.
Correct.
I have no other questions for this witness.
Are there any questions for this witness from any member of the jury? I don't see any, sir. You can step down.
Your Honor, at this time, the state is going to rest.
All right, the state has rested. That means the state's done with its presentation of the evidence in this case. At this time, we'll take our noon recess. Please be back in the jury room, ready to go at about 1:20 p.m., please. 1:20 p.m. Please remember the admonition.
All rise for the jury.
Well, that's it. State rests. Let's see what Lori's going to do now.
Does the defendant intend on putting on a case, any witnesses or testifying?
We plan on doing our Rule 20, Your Honor, and no.
Okay, go ahead with your Rule 20.
Can we do that when we get back from lunch?
Sure. If you're telling me you don't plan on testifying or you don't plan on calling witnesses, let's finalize the jury instructions though right now. Did you get a chance to look at those?
We did.
All right. Let me go to the state first. Why don't we do it this way? We'll just go through one page at a time to make sure everyone's on the same page. So the cover page, then page 2 is duty of the court, evidence to be considered, rulings of the court. Those are standard. Any objections to those from the state? Defense?
No.
Page 3, direct and circumstantial evidence, redacted exhibits, indictment not evidence, self-represented defendant. Any objection to those from the state?
No, Your Honor.
From the defense?
No. No.
Sorry, okay. Page 4, comments are not evidence. That was modified a little bit because the defendant represents herself. Credibility of witnesses, testimony of law enforcement officers, expert witnesses. Any objection to those from the state?
No.
Defense?
No objection.
Page 5, defendant need not produce evidence, defendant need not testify, voluntariness of defendant's statements, and then the start of the jury not to consider penalty. Again, all standard. Any objections from the state?
Judge, we actually have no statements by the defendant, so
That's true. We can probably delete that. There were, yeah, I think that's right. There were no statements, so I would intend on deleting that. Anything else from the state?
No, Your Honor.
How about from the defense?
No, we agree.
You agreed that that should be deleted?
Correct.
Okay. Page 6, presumption of innocence, burden of proof, evidence of any kind, voluntary act. Any objection to those from the state?
No.
Defense?
No objection.
Page 7, the absence of other participant, motive, and then the charged offense starts with the charged offense and then defines what is first degree premeditated murder. Any objections from the state,
No.
from the defense?
No objection.
All right, page 8, a definition of premeditation. Then we have the elements of conspiracy, scope of proof of conspiracy, and proof of membership in a conspiracy. Any objection to those from the state?
No.
Defense?
No objection.
Page 9, definitions, intentionally, knowingly. A part of the accomplice. Any objection to those from the state?
No.
Defense?
No objection.
Then top of page 10, accomplice, act, and I don't know why aggravated assault
think
tonight. I
that's-
must have left that in from the last one. I'm going to delete aggravated assault. I think that was on the crime prevention from our last trial. So my mistake on having that in there. I'll delete that. Other than that, any objections from the state?
No.
Defense?
No objection.
And then we have the jury foreperson and the closing instruction. Any objection of those?
No.
Defense?
No objection.
And then we have a form of verdict. Any objection to that from the state?
No.
Defense?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No objection to it.
All right. Any others that I haven't included that the state has requested?
No, Your Honor.
Defense?
Your Honor, we would ask for mere presence just because they put up the videos of me being at the storage unit at that time.
Well, mere presence would apply to the crime scene itself.
I understand that,
I
but
would
I think
think.
it would cover it.
I don't think it's applicable, but I don't mind including it if the state agrees with the state's.
Given it's the conspiracy to be safe, I'm fine including
Okay,
it in there,
we'll add
Judge.
mere presence back. I think I had it last time.
Mm-hmm.
I will probably put that. How about if I put that right behind absence of other participant before motive? In that area, it makes sense, I think.
That's fine.
All right, any other additions?
That's
All right,
it,
so
Your
when
Honor.
we come back from lunch at 1:20, the defendant will do her Rule 20 motion. When this defense, I'm sorry, when the jury comes back in, I'll turn to the defendant who is telling me she's going to rest her case at that time, and I'll read the instructions, go right into closing arguments. All right, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Lunch it is, and we'll be back.
All right, we're back on the record. State of Arizona versus Daybell, Sierra 2022-001242. The parties are present. Ms. Daybell, go ahead.
With the Rule 20, Your Honor?
Yeah.
Okay. The court must enter a judgment of acquittal on any offense charged in an indictment if there is no substantial evidence to support a conviction. Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder requires the state prove that I, one, agreed with another, in this case Alex, that one or more of us would engage in conduct that equaled first-degree murder, and two, that I intended to promote or assist in the conduct. The only evidence that has been presented simply establishes that I have been seen on video placing items into a storage unit. A phone that is connected to me through an email made phone calls during this time frame, and a Google search relating to Gilbert, Arizona. None of this evidence establishes that I agreed with Alex Cox to engage in conduct that equals first degree. The state has the burden of establishing all elements of an offense have been committed, and thus there is not substantial evidence to support a conviction.
All right. the state want to respond for the record?
Sure. Looking at the evidence in the light most favorable to the state, there is substantial evidence for a jury to find the defendant guilty of conspiring with Alex Cox to commit first-degree murder of Brandon Boudreaux. In this case, in determining if a conspiracy existed, the jury can look at the fact that the defendant went with Alex Cox to buy the burner phone, that she loaned her Jeep to him to be used, that she rented a storage unit, that she Googled how to remove the rear seat, that she hid the tire and seat, and that she created an alibi for her brother by having those two phones interact while he was in Gilbert, Arizona.
All right. The standard is whether a reasonable juror could find the defendant guilty, whether there's substantial evidence that a reasonable juror could find the defendant guilty. The state has presented a compelling case that Alex Cox traveled to Gilbert, Arizona and attempted to kill Mr. Boudreaux. There's other circumstantial evidence that establishes that the defendant was aware of Mr. Cox's plans and facilitated those plans and assisted in those plans in several different ways. It's ordered denying the motion for Rule 20. Anything else? All right, just confirming that the defendant doesn't intend on testifying or calling any witnesses.
Correct. I would like to again just admit the letter from Tammy. It was
Did we
marked.
get
Just
it
wanted to
marked?
let you know that.
Okay, 203, for purposes of maintaining the record and any appeal issues, 203 would be admitted for the record, but not to the jury. Anything else? All right, let's bring the jurors in. I'll turn to the defendant when the jury sat, and the defendant presumably will say that she rests as well. Thank you.
All right, the jury.
Be seated when you get to your seat. All right, thank you. The jury is now present. Everyone can be seated. The defense has rested before lunch. I'll now turn to the state rested before lunch. I'll now turn to the defense.
The defense also rests, Your Honor.
All right, at this time, we are going to hand out the final jury instructions. My assistant will hand those to the jurors. Do the parties already have their copies?
Yes.
Okay. All right, it looks like all jurors have copies of the final jury instructions. Much like the preliminary instructions, you're free to follow along or just listen. I'm going to read these instructions as required. It is your duty as a juror to decide this case by applying these jury instructions to the facts as you determine them. You must follow these jury instructions. They are the rules you should use to decide this case. It is your duty to determine what the facts are in the case by determining what actually happened. Determine the facts only from the evidence produced in court. When I say evidence, I mean the testimony of witnesses and the exhibits introduced in court. You should not guess about any fact. You must not be influenced by sympathy or prejudice. You must not be concerned with any opinion that you feel I have about the facts. You as jurors are the sole judges of what happened. You must consider all these instructions. Do not pick out one instruction or part of one and ignore the others. As you determine the facts, however, you may find that some instructions no longer apply. You must then consider the instructions that do apply together with the facts as you have determined them. You are to determine what the facts in the case are from the evidence produced in court. If the court sustained an objection to a lawyer's question, you must disregard it and any answer given. Any testimony stricken from the court record must not be considered. Admission of evidence in court is governed by rules of law. I've applied those rules during the trial and resolved any issues concerning the admission of evidence. If an objection to a question was sustained, you must disregard the question and you must not guess what the answer to the question might have been. If an exhibit was offered into evidence and an objection to it was sustained, you must not consider that exhibit as evidence. If testimony was ordered stricken from the record, you must not consider that testimony for any purpose. If evidence was admitted for a limited purpose, you shall consider that evidence only for that limited purpose. Do not concern yourselves with the reasons for my rulings on the admission of evidence. Do not regard those rulings as any indication from me of the credibility or weight you should give to any evidence that has been admitted. Evidence may be direct or circumstantial. Direct evidence is the testimony of a witness who saw, heard, or otherwise sensed an event. Circumstantial evidence is the proof of a fact or facts from which you may find another fact. The law makes no distinction between direct and circumstantial evidence. It is for you to determine the importance to be given to the evidence regardless of whether it is direct or circumstantial. Some of the exhibits that have been admitted into evidence have had portions deleted from them for legal reasons. Do not concern yourselves with the reasons why some portions of the exhibits have been deleted. Do not speculate upon what the deleted portions might or might not reveal. The state has charged the defendant with a crime. A charge is not evidence against the defendant. You must not think the defendant is guilty just because of a charge. The defendant has pled not guilty. This plea of not guilty means that the state must prove each element of the charge beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant in this case represents herself. All instructions I read to you that include references to lawyers or attorneys apply equally to the defendant's self-representation at trial. The defendant's decision to represent herself should not be considered by you when determining the facts. In their opening statements, the prosecutor and the defendant talk to you about the law and the evidence. In a few minutes, the prosecutor and the defendant will give their closing arguments and will talk about the law and the evidence. What they said or say is not evidence because it is not sworn testimony, but it may help you to understand the law and the evidence. In deciding the facts of this case, you should consider what testimony to accept and what to reject. You may accept everything a witness says or part of it or none of it. In evaluating testimony, you should use the test for truthfulness that people use in determining matters of importance in everyday life, including such factors as the witness's ability to see or hear or know the things the witness testified to, the quality of the witness's memory, the witness's manner while testifying, whether the witness had any motive, bias, or prejudice, whether the witness was contradicted by anything the witness said or wrote before trial or by other evidence, and the reasonableness of the witness's testimony when considered in the light of the other evidence. Consider all of the evidence in the light of reason, common sense, and experience. The testimony of a law enforcement officer is not entitled to any greater or lesser importance or believability merely because of the fact that the witness is a law enforcement officer. You are to consider the testimony of a police officer just as you would the testimony of any other witness. A witness qualified as an expert by education or experience may state opinions on matters in that witness's field of expertise and may also state reasons for those opinions. Expert opinion testimony should be judged just as any other testimony. You are not bound by it. You may accept it or reject it in whole or in part, and you should give it as much credibility and weight as you think it deserves, considering the witness's qualifications and experience, the reasons given for the opinions, and all the other evidence in the case. The state must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt based on the evidence. The defendant is not required to produce evidence of any kind. The defendant's decision not to produce any evidence is not evidence of guilt. The state must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt based on the evidence. You must not conclude that the defendant is likely to be guilty because the defendant did not testify. The defendant is not required to testify. The decision on whether or not to testify is left to the defendant. You must not let this choice affect your deliberations in any way. You must decide whether a defendant is guilty or not guilty by determining what the facts in the case are and applying these jury instructions. You must not consider the possible punishment when deciding on guilt. Punishment is left to the judge. The law does not require a defendant to prove innocence. Every defendant is presumed by law to be innocent. You must start with the presumption that the defendant is innocent. The state has the burden of proving the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. This means the state must prove each element of the charge beyond a reasonable doubt. In civil cases, it is only necessary to prove that a fact is more likely true than not, or that its truth is highly probable. In criminal cases such as this, the state's proof must be more powerful than that. It must be beyond a reasonable doubt. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is proof that leaves you firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt. There are very few things in this world that we know with absolute certainty, and in criminal cases, the law does not require proof that overcomes every doubt. If, based on your consideration of the evidence, you are firmly convinced that the defendant is guilty of the crime charged, you must find her guilty. If, on the other hand, you think there's a real possibility that she is not guilty, you must give her the benefit of the doubt and find her not guilty. The state must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt based on the evidence. The defendant is not required to produce evidence of any kind. The decision on whether to produce any evidence is left to the defendant. The defendant's decision not to produce evidence is not evidence of guilt. Before you may convict the defendant of the charged crime, you must find that the state has proved beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed a voluntary act. A voluntary act means a bodily movement performed consciously and as a result of effort and determination. You must consider all the evidence in deciding whether the defendant committed the act voluntarily. The only matter for you to determine is whether the state has proved the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant's guilt or innocence is not affected by the fact that another person or persons might have participated or cooperated in the crime and is not on trial now. You should not guess about the reason any other person is absent from the courtroom. Guilt cannot be established by the defendant's mere presence at a crime scene, mere association with another person at a crime scene, or mere knowledge that a crime is being committed. The fact that the defendant may have been present or knew that a crime was being committed does not in and of itself make the defendant guilty of the crime charged. One who is merely present is a passive observer who lacked criminal intent and did not participate in the crime. The state need not prove motive, but you may consider motive or lack of motive in reaching your verdict. I will now tell you about the crime with which the defendant is charged. Count 1, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. The crime of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder requires proof that the defendant, on or about October 2nd, 2019, with the intent to promote or aid in the commission of first-degree murder, agreed with Alexander Cox that at least one of them or another would engage in conduct constituting the offense of first-degree murder. The crime of first-degree premeditated murder requires proof that a person, 1, caused the death of another person, and 2, intended or knew that he or she would cause the death of another person, and 3, acted with premeditation. Premeditation means that the defendant intended to kill another human being or knew she or a co-conspirator would kill another human being, and that after forming that intent or knowledge, reflected on the decision before killing. It is this reflection, regardless of the length of time in which it occurs, that distinguishes first-degree murder from second-degree murder. An act is not done with premeditation if it is the instant effect of a sudden quarrel or heat of passion. The time needed for reflection is not necessarily prolonged, and the space of time between the intent or knowledge to kill and the act of killing may be very short. The crime of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder requires proof, 1, the defendant agreed with one or more persons that one of them or another person would engage in certain conduct, and 2, the defendant intended to promote or assist in the commission of such conduct, and 3, the intended conduct would constitute the crime of first-degree murder, and the defendant knew that such conduct was a crime. To prove a conspiracy, it is not necessary to show a formal meeting or an express agreement. A conspiracy may be inferred from circumstances showing a common criminal objective and does not require proof that all means set forth in the charging document were agreed upon or actually used, nor that every person involved was a member of the conspiracy. One may become a member of a conspiracy without full knowledge of all the details of the conspiracy. On the other hand, a person who has no knowledge of a conspiracy but happens to act in a way that furthers some object of the conspiracy does not thereby become a conspirator. Before you find that a defendant or any other person was a member of a conspiracy, the evidence must show beyond a reasonable doubt that the conspiracy was knowingly formed and that the defendant or other person knowingly participated in the unlawful plan with the intent to promote or assist the carrying out of the conspiracy. One who knowingly joins an existing conspiracy is as responsible as an originator or instigator of the conspiracy. A person understanding the unlawful character of a plan who knowingly encourages, advises, or assists the undertaking thereby also becomes a conspirator. In determining whether a conspiracy exists, you should consider the actions and statements of all the alleged participants. However, in determining whether a particular defendant was a member of the conspiracy, you should consider only that person's acts and statements. A person cannot be bound by the acts or statements of the other participants until it is established that a conspiracy existed and that person was one of its members. Intentionally or with the intent to means that a person's objective is to cause that result or to engage in that conduct. Intent may be inferred from all the facts and circumstances disclosed by the evidence. It need not be established exclusively by direct sensory proof. The existence of intent is one of the questions of fact for your determination. Knowingly, willfully, or new means that a person is aware or believes that his or her conduct is of that nature or that the circumstance exists. It does not require any knowledge of the unlawfulness of the act or omission. If the state is required to prove that the defendant acted knowingly, that requirement is satisfied if the state proves that the defendant acted intentionally. A defendant is criminally accountable for the conduct of another if the defendant is an accomplice of such other person in the commission of the offense, including any offense that is a natural and probable or reasonably foreseeable consequence of the offense for which the person was an accomplice. Accomplice means a person who, with the intent to promote or facilitate the commission of the offense, does any of the following. 1, solicits or commands another person to commit the offense, or 2, aids, counsels, agrees to aid, or attempts to aid another person in planning or committing the offense, or 3, provides means or opportunity to another person to commit the offense. Act means bodily movement. The case will soon be submitted to you for your decision. When you go to the jury room, you will choose a foreperson. The role of the jury foreperson is important, but please remember that the foreperson's opinion about the case is not more important than that of the other jurors. The opinions of each juror count equally. The jury foreperson's responsibilities include the following. Make sure every member of the jury is present during the discussions and deliberations. 2, make sure that the deliberations are conducted respectfully and that all issues are fully discussed. The discussions should be open and free so that every juror may participate. 3, all jurors should be allowed to state their views about the case and what they think the verdict should be and why. 4, all members must agree unanimously on any verdict. Therefore, the foreperson should count the votes to ensure that every juror has voted. 5, if you reach a verdict, fill out the verdict form and then sign the form on behalf of the jury. 6, if the jury reaches a verdict, the foreperson will inform the courtroom assistant. When the jury returns to the courtroom, the foreperson will bring the signed or unsigned verdict form as well as any question forms that may have been used. 7, when you return to the courtroom, the court will ask the foreperson whether the jury has reached any verdict. The foreperson will respond yes or no. The foreperson is not expected to read any verdict to the court. That will be done by the clerk. In just a few minutes, you will hear the closing arguments in this case. After that, the case will be submitted to you for decision. I suggest that you discuss and then set your deliberation schedule. You are in charge of your schedule and may set and vary it by agreement and the approval of the court. After you have decided on a schedule, please advise the courtroom assistant. You are to discuss the case and deliberate only when all jurors are together in the jury room. You are not to discuss the case with each other or anyone else during breaks or recesses. The admonition I have given you during the trial remains in effect when all of you are not in the jury room deliberating. After setting your schedule, I suggest that you next review the written jury instructions and verdict form. It may be helpful for you to discuss the instructions and verdict form to make sure that you understand them. Again, during your deliberations, you must follow the instructions and refer to them to answer any questions about applicable law, procedure, and definitions. Should any of you or the jury as a whole have any question for me during your deliberations or wish to communicate with me on any other matter, please utilize the jury question form that we will provide you. Your question or message must be communicated to me in writing and must be signed by you or the foreperson. I will consider your question or note and consult with the parties before answering it in writing. I will answer it as quickly as possible. Remember that you are not to tell anyone, including me, how you stand numerically or otherwise until after you have reached a verdict or have been discharged. During your deliberations, you must not communicate with or provide any information to anyone by any means about this case. You may not use any electronic device or social media to communicate to anyone any information about this case or to conduct any research about the case until I accept your verdict. 12 of you must agree on a verdict. You must be unanimous. Once all 12 agree on a verdict, only the foreperson needs sign the verdict form on the line marked jury foreperson. You will be given one form of verdict. The verdict form reads as follows. There is no significance to the order in which the options of guilty and not guilty are listed on the verdict form. At the back, this is the sample verdict form. You'll get an official verdict form from the clerk. But this is the sample verdict. Count 1, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. We, the jury, duly impaneled and sworn in the above entitled action, upon our oaths, do find the defendant, Lori Daybell, as to the crime of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder occurring on or about October 2nd, 2019, as follows. Check only one, and the options are not guilty or guilty.
Okay, we are going to head into closing statements, and then it's going to be turned over to the verdict. I'm going to end this stream and do a separate one for closing statements because I do like to have them separate. They're very important. And I just shortened this one, get it up for you all on what happened on trial day 5. Then there'll be the closing statements, and then it goes to the jury. There'll be a few hours after closing statements for the jury to deliberate. I don't really think they'll be back tonight, but if they are, we'll stay live for a little bit. Or at least have the recording open a little bit. Otherwise, I'll be setting up a stream for tomorrow for when the court opens for jury deliberation. I don't see it going past tomorrow, honestly. But we'll see. I'll check out opening statements. Will be up shortly. Everybody, thank you for checking this out. And if you have any comments, please, hit the comment section. Any questions, comments, good or bad, suggestions, other cases. The interaction is why I do this. True crime junkie, so to speak, but I really love the process in this trial, although annoying at many times, was full of process. See you later.